Okay, so everyone went to the field, so you must have an answer of some sort of what you saw. Did you see more of the disease in the upper canopy or the lower canopy? The lower leaves were upper. And which pattern did you see most? Was it on every leaf or a few leaves, or was it
mostly the leaves.
okay? And you're saying upper, so mainly like this, or
Some
okay,
more, but more upper than.
okay. So how about the rest of the leaves? Were these clean or everything was
Some cases they were good below or
okay?
good above, but
Okay,
different ones different ways.
okay. All right, great. So anyone else that saw something different? How about the first area that I showed you? Okay, all right.
Whites in the heads.
Okay.
Upper, so.
Yeah, some bleaching in the middle of the head. Okay. So how about the first part of the field that I showed you? What kind of things came into your mind? It was a little area that had all these plants looking not healthy for sure. But more I'm interested in the pattern, you know. So every plant was infected, okay? And they kind of looked systemic, like every part had the same symptom. So if you see something like that, you really want to suspect a viral disease. Because for bacteria, but they'll be on individual leaves, but it won't be about the same symptom level on every leaf. Okay. So probably you saw a lot of tan spot that was mainly in the lower parts of the plant, but it's also coming up. And then he saw head blight, of course, is in the wheat head, and we'll talk more about that.
Is there much rust out in the plots, or?
No, I haven't seen any rust here.
Okay.
I have seen rust in South Dakota in somewhere near Del Monte.
Charles
That which has,
County.
yeah, one of those counties we found. I have a leaf actually here. That will be.
Trip a couple days ago too.
Yeah, he found stripe rust in Tripp County. So we have some presence of rust in South Dakota, but not here. At least the plants I've looked at haven't seen any rust. Okay. Any other observations or questions you may have at this time about disease patterns? Okay. All right. So now I'll change gears and talk specifically about some of the 3 major diseases that we thought are important. And like, let me see if I can get his name. Yeah, like Cherie mentioned, Fusarium head blight, and that will be our #1 disease to talk to you today. So, Fusarium head blight or scab, I'm sure you've heard about it. It's a serious disease because it impacts yield and also produces a mycotoxin, which is a healthy hazard. Okay, so not only do you lose grain in the form of shriveled seed, like this whole bleached head is going to produce scabby, shriveled seed that does not weigh anything, but then you also have a danger of having a mycotoxin, and Connie's trunk or Bob will talk more about mycotoxins, especially in feed. They may reduce feed intake as well as causing vomiting. So this disease, the pathogen that causes this disease is called Fusarium graminearum. Now there are many species that cause scab, but the main one that has been detected frequently is Fusarium graminearum. So this fungus survives on corn residue or wheat residue or barley. So any cereal can be a host of Fusarium pathogen. So you can see these black masses of the fungus on the corn residue. And if you zoom in more, you can see these survival structures of the fungus. And so this can remain on the crop residue for a long time, for years. And so that's why it becomes kind of tricky to manage it. especially when you're doing like no-till cultivation. So what happens is that during spring, when you have enough moisture, enough rain, this survival structure is going to swell and start shooting off ascospores. So these spores that are produced in this fungal survival structure are called ascospores. And once they shoot up in the air, the wind picks them and then blows them in the field. And at the right time, like in this case, which is flowering time, the ascospore take the advantage of infection through the answer, this part of the flower, especially when it is degenerating, probably after pollination. Okay, so the ascospores infect the wheat head through the flowers, mainly through the answer, and then over time it can spread through the entire wheat head, as we see in this example. And initial infection can happen from any part of the head, maybe from the top of the wheat head, in the middle, or even from the bottom part of the wheat head. I will be showing you the examples. So once the infection has taken place, what happens is that the fungus then produces the mycotoxin that then will help the fungus to spread within the wheat head. So it's usually the mycotoxin that kills the plant cells and then helps the fungus to spread within the wheat head. Okay. Now, once you have ascospores establishing infection, another type of spores are produced. They're called conidiospores. Now, these conidiospores can also reinfect the plants, but those ones are not important as the ascospores. Okay. So that's why we say if you have to have effective control of Fusarium head blight, you have to time spraying of protective fungicide around flowering, okay? Because that's the window that the infection will happen. Now, infection can happen after flowering, but that one is not going to impact yield or even mycotoxin accumulation as the infection that happens around flowering or shortly after flowering. Okay, so it's really an important aspect to know when infection takes place and when can a fungicide be applied. I believe Con Strank will talk more about that, but I wanted to present to you the biology of the fungus so that you really have a complete picture of what's going on. Where does the fungus survive, and how is it spread into the field, and how does infection take place?
So is a Prosaro got to be on before flowering then to be effective?
So you don't want to put on Prosaro very early, like when the heads have just emerged.
Okay.
But some of the recommendations include applying when at least 15% of the flowers have started.
15?
Yeah, 15%. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Because usually it should be about 7 days before flowering starts once the head has emerged.
Flowering seems like it happens pretty fast.
It does, yeah.
Yeah.
So,
That's why I'm asking what is the perfect timing to get the maximum results out of Prosaro?
right. So you really want to make sure that you're not too early or too late. So you have that limited window to put in your fungicide. Now, if by the time you see these symptoms, it's already too late to apply a fungicide. And like Connie Strunk will explain, the best fungicide class that has been found to be effective against Fusarium head blight is the triazole class of fungicides, so Caramba, Prosaro, and so on. Okay.
So he can't infect until it flowers. You're saying?
Well, that's a good point. Now you can have Fusarium, and Bob will mention, you can have a Fusarium. Are you talking about the head blight or the fungus affecting other parts of the plant?
Head blight is what it does, okay. Scab.
Talking about the
Yeah.
scab.
Yeah, so scab can only happen around flowering. It can also happen after flowering, but that will not result into significant disease development. So the most significant disease development will happen when infection happens at flowering. Yeah. But the fungus, which is Fusarium and has many species, can infect other parts of the plant, the crown and the root, But the most important infection for scab is through the head. That's the only infection actually that happens that will cause FHB or scab for short. So any questions on scab?
The only
Yes.
way the ascospores can get it, they have to come in contact with the head.
Absolutely.
Contact with the head.
Yes.
They can't land on the flag leaf
And cause
Scab.
scab. No,
they
it
have
won't
to come
happen.
in contact.
Right. We should also mention the importance of environment for the infection to take place. So usually, and we know this, that I'm sure you've heard this before, that for any disease to develop, you need 3 factors: the host, the pathogen, and the environment. So even for Fusarium head blight, environment is really critical. And the most important factor of environment is the rainfall or humidity. So high humidity, high moisture around flowering, and when you have these ascospores in the air, you're going to have scab developing.
Warm temperatures.
So yeah, temperatures too. Around flowering, temperatures are going to be warm. If it is too hot, beyond I think it's 85 degrees, then you have some of these spores cascading, and so they won't be alive to cause infection. Also, if it is very cold, maybe below 65 degrees, infection may not be efficient. So out of 10 spores, probably you may have 1 causing infection. Okay.
So a few days ago, the scab model said we were fairly low risk. Has that changed with some recent moisture, or is what is the scab model on the website saying?
Okay, I'm glad you mentioned that. So we have a prediction tool, a national Fusarium head blight prediction tool that uses rainfall weather pattern to try and predict what's likely to happen. So I think the week that we had comments on that website, there was no moisture for the last few days. But since then we have had moisture, so the risk should be now slightly high. Yes, and in fact some of the fields that I passed through, even as you can see this field, there is quite amount of scab that's developing. So, yeah. So now what I would like to do, my human tripod, you can rest.
And he speaks too.
Yeah,
Yeah,
he-
that tripod.
Oh yeah, he can speak. All right, so I'm gonna pass through these wheat heads that have scab. And so one really good symptom to identify scab is look at the infected spikelets. They're gonna have a little bit of pinkish, spores of this fungus, and that can really tell you that this would be Fusarium. Okay, so I'll pass this around and also take a note of where the disease is appearing. Could be at the top of the spike or in the middle or any point of the head.
Start in the middle, right? And that's the early
On the flower.
where the flower starts, but the scab.
High down, you might not get scab there.
Yeah, and this is pretty much the same, but I think this one has really good pink
Okay.
this color. Yeah. Okay.
So if we have scab showing up in winter wheat now, is that a pretty good indication that spring wheat should be protected?
Pretty much, because that would indicate that there's enough inoculum
Right.
in the air, unless there's low moisture and dry conditions.
Right. Yep.
Probably, yeah. So
An awful lot what residue you plant it into too.
right.
Not
Right.
plant it into corn, wheat,
Right.
sorghum,
Yep.
or millet.
Yep.
Yeah.
That would be
Get much scab.
another risk factor to consider. Yeah.
What about sunflowers?
Sunflowers are not a host of scab, so
Soybeans.
yeah, those are non-hosts, so that shouldn't affect.
Is Milo, is that a host? Like corn would be for Fusarium?
So
Yeah.
sorghum would be a cereal, I would think so.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, so as those wheat heads with Fusarium are going around, I wanted to mention some other causes of bleaching of heads that may mimic Fusarium head blight. So it's really crucial that you identify whether you have a lot of Fusarium or whether the bleaching of heads is being caused by something else. Why is that important? If you're going to decide the cultivar that we'll use next season, okay, so then you can evaluate how it is performing in the field. So you don't want to think that it has a lot of fusarium when actually it's something else. Okay. Also to know whether the field has a lot of maybe source of inoculum, whether it was residue. You want to know where is it coming from. Is it because it was wheat on wheat or wheat on corn? So if you're doing a rotation and you're trying to decide, you want to have a good idea how much fusarium was there. So that's why it's important to know that, okay, this is not fusarium and that is fusarium, or scab and this is not scab. So how do you know if it is scab or not scab? For other causes of bleaching of wheat heads, normally the peduncle is going to be also blighted, or it will be drying up. Okay, but as you can see, those peduncles, they are still green. Okay, so that's one distinction. So yeah, this is still green, but oh, this is already dried up. The other feature that can help you to tell is that for scab, you start with a few spikelets. Although sometimes you can have the whole wheat head bleached, but usually you can see a few spikelets. But for other causes like root rot or insect damage, or I have another example, you're going to have the whole wheat head bleached. Okay, so you get that difference. And then the last one that I mentioned is when you look carefully at the scab infected kernels, I mean spikelets, you might see some purple color or pinkish color. So that would be an indicator of scab development. So let's see. I think
If you're not seeing it, let us know, and we can certainly help you see that.
I had some wheat heads that were damaged by hail, and they were also white. So that's another thing that can happen. Again, that can help you to differentiate between scab infected heads and other causes. Okay. So any questions on scab? Yeah, frost damage can also cause some wheat heads to be bleached. Any questions or comments or? Okay. So if there are no questions, then let's go to another disease that is really important, and that would be the cereal rust. And I'm glad one of you mentioned if rusts are going to be seen this season in South Dakota. So rusts in cereals, there are 3 types, but rusts are important because of 3 properties that they have. They can form new races. So you might have a cultivar that is resistant to this race, but then next season when you grow it, it may succumb to rust infection. Okay. So the rust has the capacity to develop new races in a very short time. That's why breeders have to keep screening material, but also plant pathologists like me, we have to keep correcting races. We keep correcting leaf rust samples and stem rust samples to try and see if we have a new rust in the area. Okay, so that's one factor why rusts are important, because of the ability to form new races. The other reason is that rust can be transported to long distances. They can be blown by wind over long distances. And in fact, here what we have here, this map is showing us what is called the Puccinia pathway. Likely here in the Midwest, because of the winters which are very cold, all the 3 rusts cannot survive in South Dakota. So every year, new spores must be blown from southern states like Texas and some parts of Mexico and Oklahoma, and then blow their way up until they reach here in South Dakota. And then, even then, the presence of spores does not mean that we're going to have the disease. There has also to be favorable conditions, and I will discuss for each rust. All right, so long distance is another reason why rust diseases can be pretty important. The third property of rust diseases and why they're important is that they can develop in a very short time. So you can be here and you have your wheat field looking perfect, and within a matter of a week, everything's heavily infected and can cause significant yield loss. You can appreciate like both all these leaves are flag leaves, and you can see how much of a leaf is left in this example. Okay, so yes.
How long is the rust actually in the leaf infected before you see the pustules start to form?
Or the incubation period from the time that infection happens and from the time you can see symptoms. So that will vary depending on these conditions, the temperature, and the moisture. But usually between 5 to 7 days, you can start to see symptoms of rust. Okay. Any other question? All right, so the other factor we need to know, like I mentioned, rusts are obligate parasites. In other words, they have to survive on a living tissue. So during winter, when everything has died, the rusts cannot survive because they have to be on a living tissue for them to survive. So likely that's why sometimes rusts are not a problem here, because they don't survive here, and by the time they blow up north, most of the crop here is done, like, you know, it's almost maturing and doesn't cause heavy losses. Okay. All right, so let us now distinguish between the three different rusts. So we have the stem rust, which is also called black rust. The leaf rust is also called the orange or brown rust. And then lastly, the stripe rust, or also called yellow rust. So the first distinguishing feature would be the color of the rust. So we have yellow, dense yellow here that we see for the stripe rust. And then for the leaf rust, it's the orange color. And then for stem rust, it's kind of hard to tell the difference between these two, the leaf rust and the stem rust, based on color. But the stem rust usually has a deeper red color that can tell it apart from the other two rusts. Okay. So these three require different weather conditions for them to develop, and the distinction is on yellow rust. So the yellow rust requires very low temperatures, so between 45 degrees and 54 degrees. So this is the only rust that requires low temperatures to develop. Okay. But it also requires 8 hours of moisture. So nights where you have heavy dew, okay, and cold temperatures, and you have the spores in the atmosphere, stripe rust is likely to be a problem. So, and I think someone mentioned that stripe rust, something you see here. Is that something you see every season, or once in a while on some cultivars or some areas? Because like in Nebraska, mainly western Nebraska, where you have a little bit of higher altitude, you can have stripe rust becoming a problem. But also in other years where the temperatures are low, it can be a problem. I really think that this season, right now, if these conditions are maintained, probably stripe rust will not be a big deal because the temperatures are pretty warm. So we may not see a lot of stripe rust developing that may cause significant yield loss.
How about like thresholds or timing of treatments?
Okay, that's a good question. So what we really recommend for all the rust management is that, first of all, is scouting. You want to keep going to the field and checking, is there any rust developing? Now, if, for example, you see some stripe rust and you have a lot of rainfall or free moisture in the forecast, and then also the temperatures are cold for stripe rust, then you really want to apply a protective fungicide to protect the flag leaf. because once the conditions are conducive for the rust to develop, it's going to develop in a very short time. And once infection has taken place, applying a fungicide, if infection has taken place, applying a fungicide is not going to help a lot. So you want to apply a fungicide to time it so that you can protect the leaves before they get infected. Okay, so good point.
Because I had heard years ago we had some rust, and I forget what the specialist said at that time. He
Mhm.
said, there's nothing really, it's still too late. You know, you're basically full of milk and just go, don't worry about it.
Right.
Not much you can do.
Right, that's another point. Where is your crop relative to maturity? If you already are past milk stage and the grain is already feeding, rust infection is not going to cause any yield loss, or it's going to cause very minimal yield loss. So, yeah. Any other questions on rust? So we do request that if you see, especially leaf rust and stem rust, you send us a sample, because we want to keep one step ahead of rust. We want to screen for new races. We want to screen for resistance. So send us a sample, and we'll send it to the rust lab in Minnesota, and that's where the USDA lab does the screening for new races. Okay. Any other questions? So the other distinction for leaf rust is that usually it's on the top part of the leaf. Okay. So while the other two rusts, the stem rust and the yellow rust, can be on any part of the plant. So the head, the wheat head, the peduncle, the leaves, the stem. For leaf rust, it's normally on the, I guess that's where it gets its name. It's normally on the leaf itself and on the upper part of the leaf. Okay, and for stem rust, like I said, the same with the yellow rust, it can be on any part of the plant. Okay, but all the three rusts will require high moisture, so heavy dew on the leaves, and also different temperature conditions. I should also mention that for stem rust, it hasn't been a big issue here in major wheat growing areas in the U.S. because of the resistance that has been incorporated into the cultivars. But recently, or maybe not recently, just a few years ago, a new race broke out in Uganda, and it's very virulent to all known resistances that we have. So that's why it's important we keep monitoring, we keep sampling and screening for new races that may be developing. Okay, so any other questions on rusts? All right, so, okay. If I may pause here and again throw it back to you and ask you so far any comments you have or what you think. Everything is going fine? And we do have water in the cooler, so if you really want to drink, or if you want to stand and stretch a little bit, or want to take a closer look at some of these.
The three rust, what's the one for South Dakota, that one we will fight the most? Is it the stem rust, or I mean the leaf rust? That's one we get the most up here, normally? Is that a fair question?
So that's a very fair.
Historically, the leaf rust.
Right. That would be like the main concern, but probably the rust that you see often is stripe rust. But then stripe rust usually, when it happens, is so mild and does not cause yield loss, a significant yield loss. So, yeah.
Stripe rust has been more common in the
Yeah.
last couple of years, 5 or so years. Than it used to be before.
But
Always seemed like if I ever saw leaf rust, it was probably a good chance I was going to see the stripe rust.
okay,
But if you had stripe rust, that didn't mean you were going to have the leaf rust.
that's right. In fact, one of the field that we found stripe rust had also leaf rust.
No, they did.
So yeah.
Temperature is a big deal
That's the
between
big-
the two.
Right. Yeah. But in terms of yield potential, the main concern is on leaf rust.
Right.
Yeah. So whereas resistance really works well for stem rust and has been incorporated in most of the cultivars, leaf rust can still be a problem. It can still develop to high levels to cause yield loss, significant yield loss. Okay. Any other comments, or you want to take a break, or we keep going?
Keep going.
Okay. So the last group we had was a little quiet. I'm gonna say this group is. What do you think?
A little less quiet.
Okay. All right. Okay. So, all right. So, I'm going to talk about one more disease, and then I'll take a break, and then Bob will take it over. So maybe he'll be more entertaining than I am.
The
Okay.
speaking foot jerk.
Yes. All right. So the last disease that I would like to talk about is a virus disease in wheat. Okay. So I think you did mention barley yellow dwarf. It's another virus that we see, but the viruses that are transmitted by the wheat cow mites can be really a big problem. And in this field, this season in South Dakota, we had, when the grower called us, we found the whole field really heavily infected by the virus, and half of the field right now has been put down. I mean, they sprayed the herbicide and then planted soybeans. So this tells you really how this can be a big deal. So that's why I thought we should know a little bit more about it. So this problem is caused by 3 viruses, usually. And I got some plants to show you. So these are tillers that are infected by the virus. Okay, you can see how they look so stunted and weak, and you can see that all the leaves on the plants are going to have these symptoms, the mosaic and the streaking on the leaves. And we have seen cases where a wheat streak and other viruses can cause up to 90% yield loss. Okay. So the 3 viruses that are transmitted by wheat cow mites are the wheat streak mosaic virus, triticum mosaic virus, and high plains virus. These last 2 are quite new. I think what you are used to here is a wheat streak mosaic virus. And pretty much we tend to think that every virus on wheat that looks yellow, not barley, yellow dwarf, is going to be wheat streak. But in the last, I believe, 6 years, these 2 viruses have been confirmed here in South Dakota. Okay, and in fact, when we sampled this field, we found a wheat streak mosaic virus and high plains virus. We haven't tested for triticum, but I really believe that it's also there. Where you have this heavy stunting and yellowing, most likely you have more than 1 virus. So these viruses are transmitted by mites. So these are not insects. Okay, the mites are really small. You can't see them with an aided eye. You need a powerful hand lens, like maybe 20 times, to be able to see these little bugs. And they usually grow within the hole of the leaf. Okay, so if you want to see mites, you need to open this and then look way inside where the leaf is carrying to be able to see the mites. And another symptom actually is where you see the leaves that are trapped like this. That would be a good indicator there are a lot of mites in the leaf. Okay. So these mites, once they feed and the plant condition becomes poor, like when the plants start drying down, the mites come on top of the leaf and they are blown by wind. Okay. So the infection that's most important happens in fall, so from September. This is like September to March, and then here you have April through June, and then July. So what's really important is the infection that happens in fall when the new crop is in. But once the crop is done, the mites need to survive on green tissue. That's another thing that mites, they are very poor survival bugs because they are very small they can easily desiccate, they can easily dry out. So they have to find a green bridge between the two crops. So before the plants come up, these mites have to survive this area so that they can continue the infection cycle. Okay. So the volunteer wheat and the grassy weeds would be the hosts where the virus in the mites can only survive. So one really good way to control these viruses is to eliminate the green bridge. Okay? So, okay. That's a good point to pause. Anyway, what I was saying is that the green bridge is where the mites survive. So the best way to control the virus is really to eliminate the green bridge. This field, what happened was that the grower did not kill off the volunteer wheat in the fall. I think he waited until spring. So all the mice had moved off, and as you can tell, that's why we see a gradient. So it's more symptoms this side as you walk through the field, because that's how the mites were being blown into the field. Okay, so for the problem of wheat streak and other two viruses here, the only way to control it effectively is to reduce, or I mean to eliminate the green bridge. So you want to apply a herbicide to kill the grassy weeds and volunteer wheat at least 2 weeks before you plant the crop in fall. And that
Spray
would,
or have it dead for 2 weeks.
okay, whichever way you want to kill it, whether spraying or tillage.
But if you spray with Roundup, it's gonna take, you know, 10 days for it to be
Yeah,
basically dead.
yeah, that's why we said 2 weeks. We hope by 2 weeks it should be dead, and the mites shouldn't survive on those plants. A mite can die within hours when it is exposed without feeding. So
So if it's dead a week before you plant,
that's very safe.
there's
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so those are the 3 diseases we wanted you to, be aware of and know how to recognize them and to know how they are spread. Then that way, you can know if you're applying a certain, management practice, is it going to be effective? So again, looking back, we looked at disease patterns and how they can help us to know the source of inoculum, okay, and also to know their timing. When do you see the disease most, and the probable risk factors that may be causing this. So we see this is, for example, wind. We also saw soil-borne pathogens, and we also saw the wind-blown pathogens that can come in through the air. Okay, and then we have seen 3 examples of major diseases that we see in wheat. So with that, any other questions that you may have? Yes, please.
What like you can watch the rust come up like Oklahoma, Kansas. A lot of times it hits Nebraska,
Yep,
and we never see it.
yep.
I mean, is that just the way it is, or is there a reason? Do we know why? I mean, because a lot of times our friends in Nebraska will be hammered.
Yep.
And we'll get a field here and a field there. Is there a
So that's a very good observation, and like I explained, for the disease to develop, you must have a conducive environment, a susceptible host, and then of course the pathogen. So it's possible that in Nebraska they would have perfect weather conditions, so maybe more moisture, and also the stage of the wheat development is more prone. While we may get it here when it's dry, there's no moisture for infection to take place. So it's really a factor of those 3 factors interplaying together for disease development to happen.
so from between Nebraska and here, all that falls apart?
Right, right.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, for example, this season, Nebraska reported stripe rust so early, like in May. I believe very early in May, they said they had seen stripe rust. So we've been scouting, thinking that we're gonna get it very soon,
Yeah.
but now this is almost end of June, and that's when we'll start seeing it developing. So, yeah, so it's still an interplay of those 3 factors. Yeah, yeah.
Do we grow mites, they can still survive in brome grass.
Yes, that's a good point. So all grassy weeds are going to be a host for weed streak and also mites. So yes, they can survive on those other hosts, and that's why even on corn. But usually the virus does not survive well on corn. So you might have mites, but they may not necessarily be carrying the virus. Okay, that's a good point. Yeah, yeah, it's probable that mites would go there, but probably they wouldn't be carrying viruses because those other hosts are not good hosts for virus, but they can be a host for mites.
So a mite may not have the virus.
Yes, a mite may not have the virus, and do not mites by themselves don't cause any significant yield loss in wheat. Yeah. Okay, so I'm still here, and if you have a question, if you think of a question, please shoot it my way. But now let's hear from Bob.